The Human Voice Project. Stories worth hearing. When It Was Saigon. This is the director's cut, and we are at episode 2, Many Ways to Serve. Hi, Coach Gary Micheloni here, and welcome back to the Human Voice Project. And as we say, stories worth hearing because every voice has a story, and every story has a voice. So today we're continuing with our director's cut of When It Was Saigon. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. While each episode stands on its own, I do recommend beginning with episode 1 whenever you have the opportunity. Chuck Dean's introduction provides an excellent overview of Vietnam and helps set the stage for the remarkable stories that follow. Now, one of the things I discovered while narrating this anthology is there was no single Vietnam experience. When most people picture Vietnam, they naturally think of soldiers on the ground. But this war was also fought from the air, from helicopters, and from transport helicopters, and countless other ways. Every veteran you'll meet experienced a different part of the same conflict, and together their stories remind us of just how broad that experience really was. If you haven't already received your complimentary Director's Cut Companion Guide, simply stop by thehumanvoiceproject.com. We'd love to welcome you to the Human Voice Project community. But enough about me. I've got 3 more veterans, great folks that you just have to meet. Our first story today is from Colonel Bill Smith, United States Air Force. In B-52 Arc Light Ops, he takes us inside one of the Air Force's most demanding missions and gives us a first-hand look at life aboard a B-52 crew during Operation Arclight. Next, we'll meet Charlie Sharps, a staff sergeant in the United States Army serving with Lima Platoon, Dog Company, 4th Battalion, 503rd Infantry, 173rd Airborne Brigade. In Loach Rescue in Indian Country, he shares the story of one of the most dangerous and unforgettable missions of his tour in Vietnam. And our third story comes from Paul M. Redhead, a U.S. Army warrant officer and helicopter pilot. In It's a Small World, he reflects on an extraordinary connection between fellow Vietnam veterans that prove just how small the world can become. 3 veterans, 3 remarkable stories, 3 different perspectives on service during the Vietnam War, and 27 stories worth hearing. We'll begin with their stories right now. Thank you for joining me. So now, let's listen. I'm Coach Gary. Chapter 4, B-52 Arc Light Ops. Colonel Bill Smith, retired, United States Air Force, Anderson Air Force Base, Guam, Kadena Air Force Base, Okinawa, Utapao, Royal Thai Air Base, Thailand, temporary duty, March to September 1970. Operation Arclight commenced in 1965 using B-52F models flying bombing missions from Anderson Air Force Base, Guam, to South Vietnam. This marked the first time that the B-52 was utilized for non-nuclear combat missions. Those missions were typically 10 to 12 hours in length. Gradually, the Air Force modified D-model B-52s, manufactured in 1955 to 1956, to carry 500-pound and 750-pound bombs in the bomb bay and under the wings. The mix of the bombs could be varied depending on the nature of the intended targets. During my tour in 1970, we carried 42 750-pound weapons in the bomb bay and 24 500-pound weapons under the wings, using racks of 12 under each wing. My home base was Plattsburgh Air Force Base in upstate New York. I was a co-pilot. Since we had G-model B-52s at Plattsburgh, my crew had to take a 2-week course at Castle Air Force Base, California, to become familiar with all the different systems in the D model. We then flew 3 training missions using the unique arc light tactics. Nuclear bombs don't have to have extreme accuracy, but iron bombs needed to be put exactly on the targets. Our TDY was to be for 180 days. The Buff, B-U-F-F, big, ugly, fat, had 8 J57 turbojet engines with a slew of throttles, gauges, switches, and handles. We did air-to-air refueling during the missions out of Guam and Okinawa. After completing training, we were sent to Andersen Air Force Base, Guam. We flew only 3 missions, basically to satisfy the brass that we were qualified, spanning about 9 days due to the fact that we flew 12-hour ball-buster missions. We took off at 1,800 hours, but had to report for briefings, personal equipment retrieval, sandwiches, water, and pre-flighting at 1,500 hours. Then we could land at 0600 the next day. Upon arrival, we carried out post-mission debriefing lasting about an hour. It all totaled up to about a 16-hour duty day. On top of it all, crew rest was imperative. We then rotated to Kadena Air Base, Okinawa, for 30 days, flying 8-hour missions every other day. After that stint, we rotated to Utapao Air Base, Thailand, flying every day with missions lasting 3.5 to 5 hours. Then we would rotate back to Andersen for 3 weeks, then back to Kadena for 30 days, and over to Utapao until our TDY was over. During that time, I flew more than 60 missions. And at that time, with a few exceptions, our missions were conducted over South Vietnam. Our crew consisted of 5 officers and 1 NCO, who was our gunner, and had his own private cubbyhole at the aft end of the aircraft. Yep, we had a quad of Ma Deuces on the tail, with a first-rate radar tracking system. One officer was the Electronics Warfare Officer, EWO. The officers on the bottom deck consisted of 2 navigators. One was the radar nav, RN, who was responsible for putting bombs on the target, and the other was simply the nav, who did the actual navigating. Upstairs in the cockpit were yours truly, the co-pilot, CO, and the aircraft commander, AC. All of us officers were captains, and Guns, also affectionately called Sergeant Smut due to his unending supply of magazines, was a Master Sergeant E7. Only my RN and AC had prior visits to Vietnam/SEA. This item will become a tad significant in short order. Each mission consisted of 6 aircraft, called a wave. The first 3 buffs took off in 2-minute intervals, as I recall. They were called a cell. The second cell took off about 15 minutes after the first cell. The lead buff in each cell would climb to 30,000 feet, the second to 30,500 feet, and the third to 31,000 feet. Number 2 airplane was spaced a mile behind number 1, and number 3 was spaced 1 mile behind number 2. We were not given the target location. Only a ground radar operator had that information. Our navs knew only that the target was inside a 20-mile circle on a map. The radar operator on the ground would vector us to the target, a large box, as it were. Approaching the target, number 1 would be vectored to the center line of the box. Number 2 would move several hundred feet to the left of center, and the number 3 would move the same distance to the right of center. I remember my first arc light sortie for 2 reasons. By the time we neared South Vietnam, night had fallen. We were about 30 minutes away from the target, just about to coast into South Vietnam, when a radio voice came up on our guard channel, used for emergencies, announcing a heavy artillery warning from 0 to 30,000 feet between a specified distance along a line starting from a specified TACCAN, a ground-based navigation aid. The warning was repeated. Well, not having much information about the Army's artillery capabilities, I pressed the intercom button, which the entire crew could hear, and asked my experienced aircraft commander, "What kind of artillery do we have that goes up to 30,000 feet?" His response, also on the intercom, was, "That's us, dummy." Oh. The second reason for remembering that mission was that about 45 seconds after we dropped our 66 bombs, and as they exploded in rapid succession, it was like broad daylight at 31,000 feet. Talk about impressive. In fact, I continued to be impressed during every nighttime mission from then on. Sometimes the detonations or explosions had colors. I soon learned that ammo detonations give off one color, fuel a different color, and bodies had no color. So our intel debriefing officers always asked about any colors that we might have witnessed. Additionally, at 30,000 feet, we had, for the lack of a better term, the best seat in the house. And for the first time, I realized that the war went on 24/7. I could see flashes from artillery, flares and tracers from the AC-47s, AC-119s, and the AC-130s spraying the bad guys nonstop. My heart went out to the guys on the ground. The buff had an intervalometer that was used to set the pulse interval between each individual bomb release. The length of the target box determined the time between the release pulses for each bomb. A long box would increase the intervals. A short box would decrease the intervals. All 66 bombs had to fall within the box. However, only on daytime missions would the strike camera in the belly of the buff be used to learn where all the bombs fell. On one of our missions, one bomb was outside the box. In addition to that, our internal voice intercom system was recorded. Our crew was summoned to a review board where officers with stopwatches and tape recorders reviewed the impulse tapes and listened to the intercom tape. Not once, but twice. The good news is that they said we did everything perfect, as did the bomb release system. The only conclusion was that the errant bomb could have had a bent fin or bumped into another bomb on the way down. Typically, those tapes save the crew's butts rather than hanging them. Another crew from Plattsburgh, who shall remain anonymous, had an unusual experience during a nighttime mission. Think no strike camera, thank goodness. During the bomb run, the nav team got behind the bombing checklist due to a checklist change that day. In the rush to get it done, and without realizing, they erroneously overlooked a critical switch. So, when the radar nav punched the pickle switch to unleash the bombs, nothing happened. Both navs frantically scanned all the buttons and switches. The nav discovered that the switch that powered all the circuits in the bomb bay had not been set. Activating that switch required the nav to exit his ejection seat with time rapidly running out. All this time, the intercom tape recorder was running, and despite missing the switch, both navs remained silent. The nav tapped the shoulder of the radar nav and pointed to the unused switch. And with that, the radar nav immediately pressed the emergency armed release buttons, which allowed all 66 bombs, 43,500 pounds worth, to be released instantly. According to the co-pilot who told me this story, with that instant loss of 21.750 tons of weight, the autopilot tripped off, causing the aircraft to suddenly pitch up and gain about 500 feet of altitude in record time. And for the next 45 seconds or so, no one said anything. And then, from inside the gunner's window-equipped turret, a loud voice emerged, "Holy shit, what a secondary!" All 66 bombs had gone off at the same time, probably still within the box. I can only imagine the size of that crater and what the ground troops who did the BDA bombing damage assessment the next day found and reported. One night coming out of Okinawa, we were flying in and out of the clouds, which were trying to become full-blown thunderstorms. Those clouds just happened to have a lot of static electricity in them. Suddenly, after passing through several such clouds, blue crinkled lines started to outline the right and left front windows while generating static throughout the intercom. The lines moved eerily up the windshield wipers on both windows and then simultaneously formed two perfect cones extending a good 18 inches out in front for about a minute. Wow! If only I'd had a digital camera available back then. Simply amazing and beautiful. It was St. Elmo's fire. As for the bumpy ride caused by the clouds, we had to air refuel as well, which was not easily done. Lots of fun. Wrapping this up, I will share a parting memory, one that could easily have been taken out of Tales of the South Pacific by Michener. It is one that does not involve flying or our missions. At U Tapao, Thailand, I shared a crew trailer with my nav in Iwo. There was a window-type air conditioner at each end of the trailer. One of them started to fail, so I made a call to CE, Civil Engineers, about it. I was told that it would be at least 2 weeks before CE could replace the failing AC unit. That night, while riding on the crew bus leading to our assigned buff for a mission, someone made mention of what had transpired earlier the day about the AC issue. Well, the next morning we were awakened by a couple of knocks on the trailer door. Opening up, there stood our gunner with two other NCOs. Behind them was a blue USAF pickup with a large box on the bed. I asked Guns what was up. He told us that he had a new air conditioner for us. Wow, I replied, and then asked him the dumb officer question, how did you get that? And in response, Guns gave us the answer that I would hear many times later in my career. Sir, you don't want to know. God bless the gunner and those NCOs. It was at that moment I learned more about what NCOs were all about. They really do run the Air Force, and it is most likely the same for all the military branches. During my 26-year career, more than once, NCOs saved my butt. In return, I always made sure that they were treated right, no matter what. During the Vietnam War, arc light was the general term for the use of B-52 heavy bombers to deliver large volumes of bombs to area targets. Bill Smith received his commission via AFROTC in 1966 at Emory University. He left active duty in 1971 to attend law school and joined an AFRES unit at Maxwell Air Force Base to fly the C-7A Caribou, where he received senior pilot status. After graduating, he was accepted for voluntary recall to active duty as a JAG. After serving 26 years in the Air Force, he retired in 1993 as a colonel. Amongst his awards are 3 Air Medals, 6 Meritorious Service Medals, a Defense Meritorious Service Medal, and the Legion of Merit. Bill is a partner in a law firm in Henderson, Nevada. Bill and his wife, Virginia, are longtime USO volunteers at the McCarran Airport and have 2 sons, with the younger son being an E-7 in the Nevada Army National Guard. Chapter 5. Loach Rescue in Indian Country. Charlie Sharps, Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army, 1967-70, Lima Platoon, Dog Company, 4th Battalion, 503rd Infantry, 173rd Airborne Brigade, Vietnam, April 1968 to April 1969. The Central Highlands of Vietnam are dominated by the Annamese Mountains, inhabited by the wild Asian water buffalo, Batang, gaur, Indo-Chinese tiger, and Asian elephant. These mountains run through Laos, Vietnam, and a small portion of Cambodia. Their average height in Vietnam is approximately 2,000 feet, but many of the mountains are in the 7,000 to 8,000 foot range. The highest is 8,524 feet, located near Kon Tum in central Vietnam. There are two weather seasons in the highlands: monsoon, with unending rain from May to October, and unrelenting sunshine and dryness from November to April. During our war in Vietnam, the Annamese Mountains were the home not only for herds of wild animals and the ethnic tribesmen known as the Montagnards, but for a group of U.S. soldiers in the 173rd Airborne Brigade nicknamed the Herd. The Herd was a bastard brigade operating under its own general and not responsible to a higher military organization such as a regiment. It was organized to be a quick reaction force which, with helicopters, could be flown all over central Nam to rescue or support other infantry groups that were in trouble. Arriving in Nam in April of 1968, I was greeted by heat, dust, and the stench of burning fecal matter. Within a month of my arrival, we combat assaulted from the coast near Tu Hoa to Ban Mi Tuot to rescue and support the 4th Infantry, who were getting their asses kicked by the North Vietnamese Army. Landing in an open swale, I bounded out of the Chinook with my platoon and was greeted by rain, wind, and ground fog. We were instantly soaked and soon learned that the enemy was not just elements of the NVA, but the elements of rain, wind, and fog provided by Mother Nature. All too soon, we knew we could not ignore the weather, as the skin on our toes and heels became soft, swollen, and white from the incessant rain. Even our teeth were sore from constant chattering. As acting platoon leader, I had to pretend as if life was normal, even though my fingers were so puffy it was hard to write, and I limped on rotting, smelly feet. Nothing was dry. Fires were impossible and would have been tactically stupid if we had gotten them ignited. C4, surreptitiously removed from claymore mines, could be used to build fires in order to make instant coffee or heat water for our freeze-dried food known as LRPs, long-range reconnaissance patrol supplies. Occasionally, the weather would break, the sun would shine, and it became warm. When it happened, the jungle looked like an explosion in the clothing section of Goodwill. Socks, pants, and shirts were strewn over any available bush, twig, or limb to dry. Alert, naked soldiers, holding their M16s, lounged about, soaking up the sun's rays. The coldest hours I ever spent in Nam were those shortly after midnight, when I always volunteered to take the 2-hour radio watch. I would be soaked to the bone and chilled to the core, with monsoon winds and rain howling overhead. I remember being so cold that it took great effort to even pull up my sleeve to check the hour on my luminous watch. We were so miserable with the wet and cold that an entire battalion of NVA could have walked up and offered to surrender, and we might have ignored them. There were times we would be assigned to do search and destroy missions somewhere in the Central Highlands. As the platoon sergeant, I attended the briefings and then would get everyone ready to proceed to the nearest LZ, landing zone, for pickup. One such time, with the briefest of introductions, the battalion commander announced, "The 4th Infantry needs help near the town of Ban Mi Tuot on the Cambodian border, and we have been instructed to give them a hand. I am sending 2 companies, Bravo and Dog, as a blocking force to stop the enemy from escaping over the border into Cambodia." My platoon was part of Dog Company. Taking off and heading for the area around Ban Mi Tuot, I sat in the open doorway of the Slick helicopter. With the turbine screaming overhead as my feet and legs dangled out, I was ready for a quick exit when we skimmed the runway at Ducklop Airfield. Looking down, I was astonished to see the ground shining as if someone had scattered bags of gold coins. It took me a second to realize I was looking at expended ammo. Thousands and thousands of fired rounds carpeted the ground on the runway as though Midas had gone mad. Seeing the expended ammo, I felt the first trickles of fear tightening my gut, knowing there must have been one hell of a firefight to leave that much brass on the ground. The North Vietnamese must have been feeling pretty confident to have attacked elements of the 4th Infantry in and around Ban Me To It. The 4th Infantry ground troops waved and cheered as we approached. We were the cavalry riding to their rescue. But to their disappointment, we didn't stop. Instead, we flew for a few more minutes and landed somewhere near the Cambodian border. My platoon was the first to offload right at the border, a known sanctuary for the enemy. The NVA, having been beaten up by the 4th Infantry, was headed for its sanctuaries in Cambodia, and we were not going to let them cross. That fear I had felt flying over Ban Me To It and Duc Lap was growing and blossoming in my chest. Signs were everywhere that the NVA had been using this area for months, possibly years. Footprints and bicycle tracks were visible on the paths we crossed. Truck tire tracks were evident on some of the roads, and many of the paths and roads were camouflaged from the air. I couldn't get over the feeling that we were being watched, and as point platoon for the company, we were extra careful for trail watchers, booby traps, and ambush sites. Eventually, we reached our company ambush site and were strung out for 100 yards or so along both sides of the top of a gully that reached like a long finger into Cambodia. The floor of the camouflaged gully was as smooth as a New England turnpike. It was wide enough for large trucks and anything else used by the enemy to transport goods from North Vietnam to the south. It was a part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail system. Our ambush site was beautiful because we would be firing down upon the enemy. All we had to do was wait for them to arrive. It rained hard all that night, and we stayed on 100% alert. Then an FNG, effing new guy, whispered to me, "Sarge, what's that squeak squeak sound I keep hearing?" "Track on tanks operating just across the border," I replied. "My God, what do we do if they decide to come?" "We fight." We not only heard the tanks, but saw distant enemy flashlights darting to and fro like the fireflies I used to chase as a kid on hot June nights in South New Hampshire. At daylight, I was relieved they had not come through our position, but the tightening gut feeling of being watched had not subsided. We were operating on NVA turf, Indian country, so it would be just a matter of time before they rallied and attempted to kick us out. We were all scared and hyper-alert, just waiting for the shit to hit the fan. And it hit in an unexpected way when we got our orders to retrieve the bodies of some Loach pilots who had been shot down while working near the Cambodian border. I was told the Loach had been shot down by the NVA using a 51 caliber machine gun. The 51 was a crew-served weapon, meaning it took 2 men to fire and at least 6 more to transport it through the jungle. So I knew that the gun was used by a company-sized group of NVA or larger. We had about a click, 1,000 meters, to travel through the jungle and territory that was not controlled by us to reach the downed chopper. After assigning someone to use a knotted string to keep count of our steps and distance, I proceeded, with one eye on the map, to continually shoot azimuths to spots on visible hilltops that I recognized from the map. We struggled for almost a day to reach the chopper, and whenever I would call for a break in our march to take a breather, I also plotted artillery impact points all around the chopper. The problem? If intelligence was wrong with their coordinates, and I was wrong with mine, calling in artillery could be a tragic mistake. Several hours before dark, we safely reached a small hilltop that overlooked the coordinates of the crash site. After securing the hilltop by establishing a perimeter, I took one squad down the hill and found the downed chopper. It was not booby-trapped, and no one was waiting in ambush. It looked as though it had not been discovered by the NVA because its prized Gatling gun was still hanging off the left front of the chopper. The chopper was a mess. Its occupants burned, torn, mutilated, and bloated almost beyond recognition as humans. Trying to get them out of the chopper and onto ponchos to take them back to the hilltop had all of us puking from the smell of ripened, burned meat. Every time we tried to move one of the bodies, the flesh would strip right off the bones. We were all tough, hardened, combat-proven soldiers, but we still had tears of frustration streaking our cheeks because we could not keep ourselves from gagging and vomiting. It was getting dark by the time we finally had the bodies out of the choppers and rolled up into ponchos, but they were too much for one squad to deal with. I ordered the rest of the platoon to come to my location to help, and we spent the night in a perimeter around the chopper, guarding the dead. One of the guys asked if he could say a quiet prayer for the dead, and I was not surprised to see everyone get down on one knee and join him. I don't think anyone slept. We had our butts hanging out by being in Indian country, NVA territory. We did have artillery for backup, but we were a long way from any other support. Around 1 a.m, we saw far-off flashlights moving around in a searching pattern. I knew it was the NVA looking for the downed chopper. I just hoped they were not looking for us. There was no way we were going to leave the bodies or the machine gun for their future use, so it would be a hell of a fight. Morning was a long time coming, and getting the bodies to the hilltop and a pickup zone took all heartbreaking day. The bodies kept falling out of the ponchos, and the Gatling gun, which weighed more than a body, got hung up on every wait-a-minute vine we crossed over. We struggled much to get them to the top, but we never suffered as much as they had by getting killed. A chopper finally showed, and hovering over our position, it dropped a litter attached to a cable. One by one, the pilots were raised skyward, followed by the minigun, and flown out to begin their long trip back to the world, the USA, and their grieving relatives, friends, and loved ones. As soon as they were gone, we rapidly went on the move because we knew that the hovering chopper had also been a beacon pointing out our position to the NVA. They knew we were there. Once we reached the pickup area, we established a tight night perimeter on another hilltop several hundred meters from the LZ. It was here we would wait until daylight for our own extraction to safety. Soon I saw flashlights darting around in the darkness. This time, the enemy was dismantling the chopper for anything of value. I waited until I figured the maximum number of NVA troops were gathered close around to help dismantle the chopper, then called in artillery. I was relieved that my coordinates were correct. The night lit up as though dawn was trying to break out of the ground. The air boomed like a mad symphonic drummer as round after round pounded the chopper and the enemy into bits. Charlie Sharps grew up in Belmont, New Hampshire, one of 7 children. Dropping out of Brigham Young University in the spring of 1967, Charlie lost his student deferment and enlisted into the Army in April of 1967. He attended basic infantry training at Fort Bliss, Texas, where he was awarded the American Spirit of Honor Medal as the outstanding graduate of his brigade. His next assignments were to Fort Gordon, Georgia for advanced infantry training, airborne training at Fort Benning, and to the newly organized non-commissioned officers course, where he earned the rank of Staff Sergeant, E6. He served in the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Vietnam from April 1968 to April 1969 as a squad leader, platoon sergeant, and acting platoon leader. As a military leader, he earned the respect of his men and received an Air Medal for many helicopter assaults as well as the Bronze Star for valor. Upon termination from the Army in June of 1970, Charlie returned to Brigham Young University and received his undergraduate degree in the summer of 1970. He later received his master's and a Ph.D. from the University of Oregon. He is the author of several books, including One More Wake Up, Where Memories Were Made, Still More Memories, One More Wake Up Revisited, When Were You in Nam?, Just Last Night, and Doc's Boy. Chapter 6. It's a Small World. Paul M. Redhead, U.S. Army, 1966 to 1970. Pilot, Warrant Officer, A Troop, Camp Inari, Pleiku, Vietnam, Special Forces B, Camp 22, Ban Me To It East, Vietnam, July 1968 to 69. Every year on the 13th of September, I am mentally taken back to 1968 at the Special Forces Camp at Duc Lap in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. I was a chief warrant officer assigned to Alpha Troop 7, 17th Air Cavalry, flying Cobra gunships. We were flying out of Ban Me To It, supporting the 5th Special Forces and 4th Infantry Division. In early September 1968, the North Vietnamese Army assaulted Duc Lap and came close to overrunning the camp. Duc Lap is near to the Cambodian border, and the NVA continued to be a threat. Alpha Troop deployed the OH-6 Scout helicopters teamed with Cobra gunships. The OH-6 normally carried a pilot and an enlisted observer. Occasionally, Cobra pilots will fill the observer seats to better understand how the scouts they were covering worked. On Friday, September 13th, 1968, we were working the area east of Duc Lap. One of the scouts was crewed by Warrant Officer Kurt Anderson, pilot, and Warrant Officer Steve Jacobs, Cobra pilot, riding as an observer. I was one of the Cobra pilots in the second team deployed. There were numerous sightings of NVA activity in the area. The team that included the scout crewed by Anderson and Jacobs was about to leave the refueling point when Steve Jacobs motioned me over to the aircraft and handed me a green grease pencil and asked me to write his name on his body armor. They then returned to the area of operations, were engaged by an NVA machine gun, and shot down within 10 minutes of my writing Steve's name. Both men died in the crash and subsequent fire. The ground unit we were supporting was an element of the 173rd Airborne Brigade. A platoon from the 4th Battalion D Company was ordered to recover the bodies and armament. 2 weeks ago, I was given a book, One More Wake Up Revisited, written by Vietnam veteran Charlie Sharps about his experiences as a platoon staff sergeant leader with the 173rd Airborne Brigade. Reading it, I had a very strong feeling his unit had participated in the operation at Duc Lap. I was put in contact with him by his son, Joe Sharps, who is employed by my close friends, the Musgroves. As it turns out, Charlie was the platoon sergeant of the unit that recovered the remains of my fellow troopers. It is a small, scary world.